Actually, I never wanted to write this book. For many years, people were asking me to write a memoir about my journey in search of meaning and fulfillment in life, but I resisted. I really didn't think I was a good writer, and I was afraid that it would be an arrogant thing for me to be writing all about myself. But then something happened that changed my mind. I was with one of my very dearest friends. His name was Bhakti Swami, an African-American man. And he was in his last stages of dying of cancer. I was with him the last 8 weeks of his mortal life. And one day he took me by the hand and he requested, please write this book. When I explained my reservations, he said it would be an act of arrogance for you to not share something that will help other people in their lives. He said, this is not the story about you. This is the story about a person who is seeking the same thing that everyone is seeking and the extraordinary things that unfolded in your life. So I promised him on his deathbed, and a few days later he passed away, and I began to write this book.
You're never lacking for drama in your life, are you? It seems like things happen on a big scale for you. You met this fantastic musician on the plane ride from America to Europe, was it? Who
yes,
was it? The harmonic.
Johnny Winter.
So, you discovered something that a lot of writers discover, which is that most writers begin writing about themselves, but they're never writing about themselves. They are and they're not. You're actually always writing about everyone. That the best thing you have to give about yourself is always about everyone. Perhaps you can talk about that.
I believe that we're all gifted. Each and every one of us are gifted with treasures that can benefit the world. That's why we're here. And if we calm our mind and focus our attention on what we can give, instead of always thinking about what we can get, then we can discover priceless treasures that we can share with others, that can bring hope, that could bring faith, that could bring meaning, and bring us closer to our real self.
When you sat down to write this, did you just let yourself just begin and see where it flowed? I assume you've told this story to people, perhaps just sitting with them orally explaining the story, or have you not? Had you not told it to anyone before in any version?
Some of the stories I told over 30 years, and people really liked it, and they were always saying, why don't you write a book? Why don't you write a book? But until this point, I didn't really feel I should. Many stories came out from the recesses of the past when I just started writing. And there was a certain hesitation, you may say fear, of writing certain things that were very personal and very private, that I really never told anyone, and I never intended to tell anyone. But once I entered into the current of the river of that process of writing, things started to really flow, and I felt that it's not about me and what I say or don't say, it's how I could be an instrument to help others. And I found that the reservations and fears could be transformed into strengths if we just have the proper attitude.
The fears can be transformed into strengths. Do you know who Gary Zukov is? He's a spiritual teacher and writer. I'd interviewed him recently. He talked about the moment when you're most afraid is the moment when you actually do get to sort of experience, I guess, divinity in a way, because that's sort of the breaking moment for you. Is that what you were talking about?
It's a time when we are impelled to search beyond ourselves to that divinity within us, to empower us to overcome our reservations and our fears. And that is one of the most enlightening experiences in life, to realize that it's not me that's doing, there's something beyond me, that we are instruments of a divine force, and if we can just connect to that divine force. The word yoga means to connect to that divine force within us and express it through our words, our actions, our thoughts, and in this case, our writing.
I talk to the writers often about writing is actually a listening experience. It's not a thinking. I mean, there's a small amount of thinking involved, but it's 90% listening. Would you agree with that? Is that how you experienced it? Even though you had told the story, even though it was your story, you still have to receive the words, exact words you're going to choose, the order of events. Would you say that is that similar? Is that similar to your experience of telling it?
It is exactly by experience. You said it much better than I could say it. Yes, it's very important that we hear what our heart is telling us. And in my case, before I would sit down every day to write, and at the beginning it was just putting everything down without reservations, not even thinking that there was an audience, just kind of letting it out. And it's incredible how much starts coming out, and how many things you remember, and how many realizations that I didn't even know. It was almost like I was teaching myself. And what I understood is it wasn't really me teaching myself, it was something beyond me, coming through me, which is the most beautiful, magical experience. So I learned that, of course, I have a spiritual path of devotion. So before writing every day and during writing, prayer was a very important part for me. That let something divine come through me for the welfare of the world, to give hope, to give faith, and to give meaning to people's lives.
At the writing conference where they came and gave me your book, the speaker was Andre Dubuse, who's a wonderful novelist, and he gave a great speech about how you, in your life, if you're trying to write a book, usually you've got your family and your job, a lot of people do, and you've got to do all this organizing to carve out your hour or two so you can have all this control over your time, so you can have that 2 hours to write. And then when you sit down, you've got to do the opposite of what you've just done and take your hands off the wheel, which is the flip of what you've been doing up to that point to arrive there at the desk. But it sounds like taking your hands off the wheel is sort of what you've perhaps committed your life to some degree.
Actually, whether our hand is on the wheel or off the wheel, life is out of our control anyway. Beyond a certain point, we have a certain amount of control, but beyond that, there's so many experiences and so many powers beyond us. And that's a beautiful thing. It could create fear, it could create hopelessness, it could create ego, but from a spiritual perspective, to transform that fear, that uncertainty, into something beautiful, wherein we can turn to that higher power and be an instrument of that higher power. Then little or big miracles can manifest through all of us.
It's a great quote from a book called A Course in Miracles. It said, "A miracle is a shift in perspective." But that's the source of it. All right, so you took this great, long physical journey from America to begin with all the way to India. Now, God's everywhere. Why did you have to travel? How many thousands of miles? 4,000? How many miles did you travel to get there? Why did you have to take a physical journey?
I took a $65 plane on Icelandic Airlines from New York to Iceland, and then to Luxembourg. And then myself and my friend Gary, we hitchhiked from London to the Isle of Crete. And there I heard a calling to go to India, to find my longing in life for meaning and fulfillment and spiritual truth. And then I left Gary and hitchhiked to India, so it was a long way. I don't remember exactly how many miles, but through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and many life-changing gifts were given to me at that time. And the things that I initially thought were the most horrible later on became the most transformative and the most beneficial to prepare me for the journey I really was trying to take. And that was beautiful. So God is within all of us, or spiritual truth is within all of us. Why travel? That was just my destiny to do so.
There's a great moment in the book where you're in Afghanistan, and you come upon some folks who are very poor, but you perceive them as being quite happy. And this is sort of one of the big turning points for you in the book that you describe, where you, I guess, they're contrasting their experience to a Western experience where poverty is equated with unhappiness, despair. And it seemed to me when I read that was you having to really shed the physical, in a sense, because it was your physical portrait of the world that probably lived in your mind had to be let go. Do you think that's part of, the way Jesus had to let go on the cross, to some degree you had to mentally let go of it. Do you think that's part of what you were going through at that moment?
Our tendency is to be very conditioned by our particular circumstances. I think I'm a man, I think I'm white, I think I'm American, and we think according to the society around us and our own experiences in this world. And one of the things I really felt was important for me in my journey was to put myself in places that were totally foreign to my own. So I really had to see other people's point of view and go beyond what I would call my own ego. And this happened in a very traumatic way in Afghanistan because, of course, I was from the counterculture of the 1960s where we were, to some extent, rebelling against the common norms of American society. But in a certain way, we were just another aspect of American society. But in Afghanistan, they were some of the most beautiful people I ever met in my life before all these political turmoils happened. They were the poorest people I ever met, but they were so hospitable and so kind and generous, taking me into their house and giving me food and giving me love, although I was just a stranger, covered with dust, hitchhiking to India. But I remember one instance. I was sitting in a little tea stall, and everybody sat on a dirt floor. It was just a shack. There was about 5 or 6 of us. And a boy, perhaps 14, 15 years old, he came in. He was in rags, practically filthy rags. You could see the boy was in total poverty. He was emaciated thin, and both of his eyes were blind. There was nothing covering it, and I never saw anything like that in my life, because our tendency is to kind of manicure things that are not right. But they were utterly deformed, and from a physical perspective, his eyes were grotesque. They were swollen, coming out of him. And he had a little branch of a tree, and on that tree, on one side was a can, and then there was a steel string that went across that and nailed to the other end. And he was just thumping that little string and singing songs in praise of his divine inspiration, or God. And as he was singing, his face lit up with joy. And all 5 or 6 of us who were sitting on the ground were mesmerized listening to him. He emanated light throughout the whole area. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is the happiest person I've ever met. But physically and materially, he's the most destitute, unfortunate person. He's in poverty, he's blind. But I never met anyone who was expressing such joy. Really, what is happiness? He was experiencing a happiness that was from within, and it was coming out. And our tendency is to look for happiness without and try to bring it in. And which is actually the more deep and substantial process. And that really changed my life. I was seeing life from a very different dimension. It's not about what you have or who you are. It's not about what people think of you. It's about what you find within yourself and the beauty in life you want to share with others.
You know, I tell writers, I don't think they always believe me, but I tell them, I said, your most important skill is not your ability to use language or know characters. Most of the people who read this magazine are fiction writers, or use dialogue. It's compassion. I said, that is your number one tool, and the writer who's the most compassionate will be the best writer. And I thought of that as you were talking about seeing everybody from all the walks of life and all the different cultures and all the different castes within those cultures. And I think it's practice would be the religion of compassion. I think we said. Anyway, perhaps you can talk about compassion. I find that if you're going to write about people who aren't you, you must bring compassion to them, whether they're Adolf Hitler or Mother Teresa.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Compassion is the universal essence of every spiritual path. So many times people's spirituality is based on external forms, rituals, explanations, affiliations. But all of these are meant really to bring us to a common essential experience, which is to love, to find that love that is dormant within the recesses of our hearts. We believe that we are spiritual beings, and within that Atma, or within that spiritual force, is love, unconditional, uninterrupted love, beyond birth and beyond death. And to express that love is compassion. There's a beautiful verse in the Bhagavad Gita, Vidyavanaya sampane brahmani kavihastini suni chaiva swapache pecha pandita samadarshana, which means a real wise person is one who sees every living being with equal vision, sees everyone as a brother, a sister, sees everyone as a part of the same source of God, and treats everyone with love, regardless of their external condition. I remember, I write this in the Journey Home book, of when I was trapped in a leprosy colony. And I was actually apprehended, and it was a very fearful situation. The lepers surrounded me because they wanted a donation, and I had no money. And this was in the jungles of the Himalayas. I was all alone with probably 50 lepers. And finally they let me go, and I was very much in culture shock, because from Highland Park, the suburbs of Chicago, I never saw a leprosy colony like this before. It was really destitute. And as I walked away, I saw one lady. She was a very old lady. Her nose was melted off. Her flesh was shriveled. She had no fingers or toes. She was just laying in the dirt of the ground in rags. And our eyes locked in each other's gaze. And she looked at me with such affection, such motherly love from her eyes, that it went right into my heart. And she saw that I was receiving her love. And then she offered a blessing to me. And I was so moved by her that I lost all fear whatsoever, and ran up and fell on my knees and put my hand under her head, where she blessed me. And then I heard her saying in the Hindi language over and over again, My dear son, may God bless you. My dear son, may God bless you. And as she was saying that, I looked up, and there were tears of joy flowing from her eyes, and she was smiling. Her face was lit. I was thinking, this is the joy of giving. Here is a woman. All she really wanted in life was someone to accept the love in her heart. And I remember walking away from there and pondering that experience, that essentially everyone has that love in their heart. But due to whatever circumstances that people have been through, some are harsh, some are cruel, some are egoistic, some are kind. But beyond that skin-deep layer of a person's physical form and a person's personality attributes, there's something divine in everyone. And if we can only see that. In the Bible it is said to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And if you do that, naturally, the byproduct is to love your neighbor as yourself. And everyone is our neighbor. Every human being, every animal, every bird, every tree, Mother Earth, we're all neighbors. And there's a beautiful Sanskrit term that has really been so much a part of my life. It's paradukkaduki, which means real civilized and really an accomplished life is to see another's pain as your own pain and to see another's happiness as your own happiness. And to always be seeking the essence of every situation and the opportunity we have in that situation to grow and to help others grow. And I believe that writing is a wonderful medium. It's writing of music, writing of literature, art are some of the greatest, timeless ways that human beings can express the inner message in a way that can move people's hearts.
So my last question is was the turning point for me, sort of connected me to to my own spiritual experience was, I mentioned this in our first interview, free choice. A lot of times the artists that I've known have been very resistant to organized religion because they see it as an impediment to free expression and free choice. But I saw free choice as an absolute source of divinity for me, the way I interpreted it. Perhaps you could talk about free choice, free will, if you will.
Free will is the greatest gift that every human being has. It can be utilized to create the most terrible destruction or the greatest enlightenment. We all have free will. And a spiritual path is not meant to repress our free will. It's meant to direct it in such a way that our full potential of creativity can be utilized in such a way that it enlightens us with joy and with a closer connection to the divinity. And in the process of sharing that gift with others, we receive it. It is a universal ideal that in giving we receive. And if we really want to give the best of ourselves to others, we become enriched by what we're giving. And when people reciprocate with us, the blessings of those people who reciprocate enrich us even more so that we can give even more.
Whatever you give, you gain. Whatever you take, you lose, I believe. Well, thank you so much. That was excellent. I've got a lot to work with.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I hope I did better this time.
Well, I have no idea how you did last time. Well, I know, actually I did. I watched clips of it. It was just fine, but there's plenty to work with. We'll have a good, solid 6.
Absorbing your energy and then giving it back to you.
Good. Well, that's the beauty of having, is that ideally that reads what you're communicating with me energetically can read with the people who are watching it. It's the advantage of having me here, hopefully. And that's why I prefer to be there, because I like to, while I couldn't hear you, I do make questions, but I wrote them all down, but of course I didn't get them, because I like to just get to know who the person is and see what there is to say. So I'm glad I got to do that. This was excellent.
It's beautiful.
Thank you guys for setting all this up. This is fantastic.
Thanks, Bill.
You put a lot of work into it, I can see. I appreciate it. I think the results will show.
It's really a pleasure to meet you.